Are you struggling with biblical obedience and don't really know exactly what that means or how to apply that to your life? Are you possibly in a season where you really feel God calling you to work on the fruit of obedience and surrender? Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about exactly that. Let's start by asking a simple question. What do you pray for? As I was preparing for this video, I pulled up this prayer journal that I started way back in 2013, and I had to share it with you because I just so happened to name my journal, What Dreams May Come. And I fasted the first week of January back in 2013. And there's a lot of specific things that I prayed for regarding family and my future. I wasn't married yet. I wasn't dating anyone. And I specifically remember praying and asking God to bless me and allow me the opportunity to someday get married and have children, and even prayed for their future life, their faith, their spouses, their adulthood, for them to have wisdom and boldness and all the things. And by the grace of God, here we are, 10 years later. And it's so amazing to be able to look back and see how God has answered those prayers. Some of them it's been yes, and some of them maybe not now, or maybe later, or just flat out no. And that's okay too. And so I just want to encourage you to think about and look at people in the Bible that we study about, especially in Genesis 12. We see Abraham and his faithfulness in trusting God even when he didn't understand or see the full picture, just like you don't see the full picture all the time. God called Abraham out of his hometown, out of everything that he knew, into a new land, and promised him that he'd be the father of many nations. There's so many promises that we see there in Genesis 12. But it's just such a good picture and representation of obedience and the importance of trusting God, being able to surrender to his perfect will and know that he is faithful. So I want you to think about, can you think of a time where in your past God was really calling you to do something new, something different, maybe uncomfortable? And what was the fruit of that? What came from it? What did you learn? We see that Abraham, while it was not necessarily comfortable for him to uproot himself and his wife out of his hometown, he did it anyway. And it just reminds me of, a thing I keep hearing again and again, that God is more concerned with our holiness than our happiness. And it's really important in today's culture to understand that God cares more about your and my holiness and not so much our happiness. So there will be times when we're pushed outside our comfort zone, and the fruit of it will be learning, will be growth, will be sanctification, becoming more like Christ. So if you've found this helpful so far, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, where I post weekly content on Christianity, motherhood, mental health, and I think you'll really enjoy it here. Just to kind of give credit where credit is due, this video series is part of the Our Hope Has Come Bible study that I'm sharing with my community through my online newsletter. So if you're interested in joining that to get more resources and information on motherhood, mental health, and a Christian worldview, check the description for a link to my newsletter. Do you remember Genesis 22, where Abraham was commanded by God to take his one and only son Isaac to the mountain to prepare him for sacrifice? And as a parent, and even before I was a parent, I remember reading that and maybe not really even understanding that whole situation, especially as a kid. But now as a parent and as an adult, as a nearly 40-year-old woman, right? It's incredible to see the picture of perfect obedience that we see in this specific situation with Abraham being willing to take his one and only promised son to the mountain as a sacrifice to God. And I remember learning a while back in a Bible study that it was very common among pagan nations for there to be blatant child sacrifice. And so this was a very genuine and interesting test of Abraham to see if he would follow through on what God commanded him. But also then for those of us who read the scriptures from here on out, understanding that God does not command child sacrifice in any way, shape, or form. And it's one of those things that has distinguished Israel from other ancient religions of the time. And the great news was that God provided the sacrifice needed in that moment, that very thing that Abraham in Genesis 22 was sharing with Isaac. God will provide for the sacrifice. He did. The angel of the Lord stopped him right before he was about to complete his mission and, declared him faithful and obedient. And what a blessing it was to see how God truly blessed Abraham. We see the fruit of his obedience in the whole line of Israel that came after, and also how Christ came out of that lineage too. So God is faithful, and it's important to look back and study the Bible and see this so that we can grow in our understanding of his perfect plan and how we can trust him, especially in those hard things. So a final chapter to look at here, which I found really interesting, is Hebrews 11, where it talks about Noah, Abraham, and Sarah, all three of them, and how faithful they were in their obedience to God, and how they trusted in his plan, and how they really walked by faith. And we see the various verses where it says Noah, if you see me looking down, I'm just looking at my notes. Noah in faith obeyed out of reverent fear. Abraham by faith also obeyed. We just talked about him. And the interesting one that stood out to me was Sarah, because I always think about how she laughed when God was talking to Abraham and said that Sarah would bear a son. And the way that I took it was almost like in disbelief that she would laugh. And so I guess in my mind, I've never really seen her as an image or an example of faith. But in Hebrews 11, I'm going to read it to you. Hebrews 11:11, it says, "By faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised." So again, just another picture here, another representation of the importance of obedience, and it comes from a heart of faith and trust and surrender, and really knowing that God is faithful and believing that he will do what he has promised.